Welcome to Viewpoints. I'm Heather Isvaron, and with me today is Andrew Lluberes, Director of Communications for Intelligence and Analysis, Office of Homeland Security. Welcome, Andrew.
Nice to be here, Heather. Nice to see you.
So you have a long and distinguished career in public service, but you started out in journalism.
I did. I was briefly at CBS News in New York, which at that time was the leading broadcast news organization, certainly in the United States, with all those fabulous old World War II veterans like Walter Cronkite and Eric Sevareid, etc., Charles Collingwood, all of whom I got to know and served as mentors. But I realized that I wasn't going to go anywhere at CBS News without getting some terrific journalism training. I had not studied journalism in school. So they are all former unipressers, as they were called. So I went around and asked for their advice, and the unanimous advice was that I go to United Press International and learn my craft. And that's eventually what I did. First to Pittsburgh, and spent, I thought I was going to go for about 6 months, and learn my craft, and then get transferred back to New York, and then go overseas and win the Pulitzer Prize. Well, 3 years later, I was still in Pittsburgh. But I did learn my craft, which was terrific, and then was transferred to New York. And after about a year in New York, I got a telephone call from Reuters, at that time based in London. And they were expanding their operations in the United States and hired me. And then I spent 8 years with Reuters and eventually leaving as the foreign news editor. In other words, the person responsible for putting together the foreign news parts of the daily report that were disseminated to the United States and Canada.
And so then you moved into federal service.
That's correct. I left Reuters at the end of 1982. I went to the Caribbean to try and start my own business, something I always wanted to do. That was a wonderful experiment, but the business didn't succeed, so I came back. I did some consulting, and in 1984 I joined the United States government, very much as a journalist, at the old U.S. Information Agency. And I was the Latin American and Caribbean news editor there, and was in that job for 11 years and did a tremendous amount of traveling throughout the Western Hemisphere, covering all kinds of stories, but mostly the end of the military dictatorships in Latin America, the historic transition to democratic government and free market economies, the Central American conflicts, the Summit of the Americas that former President Clinton hosted in Miami in 1994, and basically any story of interest to the United States foreign policy that took place in Latin America.
And so as you saw the evolution of events, world events, and as 9/11 happened, can you tell me how public affairs has evolved?
Right. Well, then when I left the U.S. Information Agency, I switched to the other side, if you will, and became a spokesman for the United States government. First at the old Immigration and Naturalization Service, and I was the national spokesman in Spanish, which was this is before 9/11. And the reason that INS had a national spokesman in Spanish is that that was their biggest immigrant community, still is. And it was very important to communicate with this audience, keep it well informed of all the different changes, because INS played a huge part in the lives of those millions and millions of immigrants who are here in the United States. When 9/11 happened, I had left INS and I happened to be at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and which was right across the river from the Pentagon. And I went up to the roof of HUD and could see the smoke rising from the Pentagon, and realized then and there that that day would be for me and my generation what Pearl Harbor had been for my parents. So from HUD, I went to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and then in 2007 came to the Department of Homeland Security. And been a very interesting career, and I would say that my journalistic background has helped me tremendously in serving as a spokesman.
Mm-hmm. And so that whole transition from being a reporter to
Mm-hmm.
then being a spokesman, and then during crisis communications and now in intelligence, there seems to be just a rush of folks who feel that there isn't transparency, there isn't that truth-telling in government as a spokesman. What is your view on that?
Well, I think in both professions, both in journalism and in public affairs in government, truth has got to be the coin of the realm. You have to do everything in your power to make sure you get it right. And if you make a mistake, then to be very transparent about that. That's certainly the tradition that the journalistic tradition that I came out of in the wire services. And I think that is basic, absolutely basic and fundamental in public affairs as well. And within government, the role of a spokesman, of a public affairs professional, a PAO, if you will, a public affairs officer, is basically to inform and educate the public about what your agency is doing. In the case of Homeland Security, of course, our mission is to keep the country safe, secure and resilient, and all our efforts in public affairs are aimed in that direction.
But it seems to me, with bloggers and with the social media, that it's actually interesting that they can make a claim of truth, and you have to disprove it as a government agency. And so with this advent of kind of, guilty until proven innocent, how have you changed? Is there a change in approach? Do you see a policy, or do you see a way ahead for this new interaction between the public and the government?
There's no question that the journalistic landscape has changed, and social media is part of it. The tradition that I came out of, which pounded into your head the importance of accuracy and getting it right and checking yet again with second and third sources if necessary, but doing everything in your power to ensure the accuracy of your story, of what you're reporting, has lapsed, sadly, for all of us. Our democracy is not as well served because of that. So government has certainly had to adjust, to the world of social media. DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, where I currently work, uses social media to communicate with its publics, and it's a very effective tool.
And how do you see that going in the future in terms of, would DHS use that, at least INA, Intelligence and Analysis, use that in some form for crisis communication to the public, or what are you using now?
Well, being the spokesman for the intelligence arm of the department is a little bit different because there are some things that, of course, cannot be made public. There is classified information. We are all bound as federal government employees to maintain the confidentiality of that information. That said, there is a role for public affairs and for communications within intelligence. It is important for the American people to know within the conventions that we can what the intelligence community is doing to keep them safe. Some of our successes and accomplishments we should also be able to talk about. And of course some we can't because they involve sources and methods, and those have to be protected. But 9/11, as it did with so many other things, changed the landscape of public affairs within the intelligence community. So the head of the intelligence community, which is comprised of 16 agencies throughout the government, is the Director of National Intelligence, and that office has a very robust and proactive Office of Public Affairs.
So there's a difference between the crisis communications and being a spokesperson. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. What I do on a day-to-day basis, fortunately, is not crisis communications. Crisis communications comes into play when there's an incident, or, for instance, when we're training in an exercise and we design a scenario and how we're going to respond to it. The Office of Public Affairs at the Department of Homeland Security has a team to handle incident communications or crisis communications, if you will. What I do on a daily basis is far more routine. My job is to, as I said earlier, keep the public informed of what I can, of what the Office of Intelligence is doing. Make sure that my principals are out speaking in public forums. I also have a role of keeping the workforce informed so that they're not working or operating in a vacuum about national, international, and DHS news. It's important for my workforce to know what the Secretary is saying on any given subject, her testimony, that of other principals that's related to the work that the Office of Intelligence and Analysis does. In a crisis situation, where I work with my incident communications colleagues and help them, I usually serve as the conduit between intelligence and public affairs, making sure that the people in, we would set up a National Joint Information Center, because DHS, the Secretary, and DHS, under Homeland Security Presidential Directive number 5, have the role to keep for communications, to keep the American public informed, the way the Attorney General has the role for the lead in investigations. So I would work with my colleagues in incident communications and the rest of the Office of Public Affairs to make sure that they are receiving the latest intelligence. And in the other direction, making sure that the Office of Intelligence Analysis knows what public affairs is saying about how the department is responding to this crisis or this incident.
And for those of us in our audience that have smaller agencies
Mm-hmm.
and may not have that routine every day, what do you wish that spokespeople would do that maybe the most common mistake that is made?
Well, to go back to what we said at the beginning of the interview, I think truth and accuracy always has to be the coin of the realm. I would recommend that all public affairs officers have a very good and close relationship with their principal. That should be somebody that they communicate with, are very comfortable with, can advise on an ongoing and easy basis. That's extremely important. And encourage their principals to be proactive in their communications, particularly in times of an incident or a crisis. For instance, if you're a law enforcement public affairs officer, your community is going to want to hear from your chief very early on to know what has happened, what that department is doing to respond, and what the community should be doing to keep itself safe. So those relationships at times like that are extremely important to have.
Well, Andrew, it was a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Best wishes.
Likewise.